Thank you. Would you ask Ms. Berger to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Ms. Berger, are you ready to carry on?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Berger, you referred this morning during the course of your evidence about communications within Celotex about KNAF. Can I take you to CEL 301024, please? 10241, please. CEL 30104241. And I'd like to go, please, to page 2 in that, which is an email of the 24th of October 2014 from you to Paul Evans about NAV. Foot of the page, page 1. We could just go to the foot of page 1. Well, let's start at page 2, actually. Let's start at page 2. Sorry. Yes. Paul Evans writes to you on that day, 24th of October, and bear in mind that you haven't seen at this stage the BRE test, because you only get that from John Roper on the 27th of October. And Paul Evans, says to you, Debbie, thanks for coming back quickly on this. My understanding is that NAF will perform their own BS8414 test to include RS5000, but it was useful to get sight of their planned system so we can provide guidance on how this compares to how we tested. Having a weekend. And you go back to him at the bottom of page 1 over to the top of page 2 on the 25th of October. I understand Paul's question now. Do you see bottom of page 1? There are other details into which I've not fed back to Paul regarding our pass for RS5000. I wasn't sure how much detail to go into, but design considerations included orientation of the board, the baseboard below the cladding that separates the fire chamber from the structure, and also the thickness of the A2 cladding. We used a 12mm board. And then at the top of page 2, the idea behind these little design tweaks was to delay the fire entering the cavity and contacting RS5000 for as long as possible. It's thought the design contributed to the flames taking 20 minutes of the 30-minute test to enter the cavity and contact Celotex, thus minimising fire propagation. Again, your guidance would be much appreciated. Now, at that date, did you think, looking back on the meeting that you'd had, we think that day, with Jamie Hayes, about the 6mm of magnesium oxide?
Yes, I think I did know then.
You think you did know by then, even though you hadn't yet seen the BRE test?
I think Jamie and I had an informal chat based on the KNAF drawing, and Jamie had outlined some concerns.
I see. Now, when you refer to the little design tweaks, you didn't expressly pick up the 6mm magnesium. Is there any reason for that?
I think I wrote this email with the things that I remembered from our conversation.
Right. But the 6mm magnesium oxide didn't ring a bell with you at that stage when you were communicating this back to Paul Evans? Right. Okay. But you did recognise at that stage, didn't you, that RS5000 would increase the propagation of flame? That's what you effectively say.
Where do I say that?
Well, its design contributed to the flames taking 20 minutes of the 30-minute test to enter the cavity.
I'm not sure I'd have understood it like that, but I understood that the tweaks that had been implemented meant that the system was more robust.
Right. Once you saw the test report and wrote WTF on it, at that point, you were already in communication, weren't you, with Paul Evans about the design tweaks?
Yes.
Was there any reason why you couldn't have gone back to him at that stage, once you knew the full picture, had been told in clear terms by reference to the photographs in the test report, and go back to Paul Evans and say, WTF? Ask him that question.
No, I didn't feel I could do that. We approached it with, I think there was an email I sent to Paul, and only Paul Evans, because obviously I had no idea. I thought this was news, and I think Jamie assisted me in writing it, right, because there's no way I could have written that.
Did Saint-Gobain, who were now the owners of Celotex, have a whistleblower policy?
They may have done, yeah. I back then, I wasn't aware of it.
Did you not think to find out whether there was one by going to personnel and asking them?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Why did you prefer to continue to perpetrate this secret along with others at Celotex rather than blowing the whistle on them and going to top management?
I was a little bit... I don't know. I don't know why I didn't. It was... I could put it down... As I sit here now, I could put it down to a couple of things. I honestly thought, telling Paul would be enough.
Now, can we go to an email in February 2015, CEL 30100151, please? And this is an email from you, at the bottom of the page, to Craig Chambers, it seems. And you say, I have some thoughts on the subject. I can't help but feel concerned with NALF replicating the system we tested to 8414. And you see that? Mm-hmm. You don't say there openly that there was 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide and 8 millimetres of Marley that had been concealed from the test report. You don't actually identify those. Is there a reason for that? Or was there a reason for that?
No, there isn't a reason other than what I've already explained.
Was your suspicion at the time that if NALF had replicated the system as described as having been tested to BS 8414 Part 2, they would have failed, or might well have failed, because of the presence in the test, but not in the replication, of the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide at the thermocouples?
I wasn't very confident about the test. Full stop. I think there were a number of design tweaks that could have contributed to, making the system more robust.
Yeah, indeed. But you don't list the absence or rather the presence of 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide in the bullet points underneath that as one of the bases of your concern if NALF replicated the test. Why was that?
I can't explain why it's not in there.
Right. And then Craig Chambers comes back to you at the top and says, Paul, Debbie, firstly, we need to be very careful how many people circulated on emails on this topic. Otherwise, a danger that things get miscommunicated, misconstrued. As I've said before, I'm not comfortable progressing this with NALF. I really feel that we need to learn more ourselves before working with any others and carrying out the bench exercise with Warrington, etc. first. We have to bear in mind that NALF have an insulation business, etc. Just in relation to the first paragraph there, he says he's not comfortable. Need to be careful about how many people are circulated on the circulation. Was it your impression that Mr. Chambers knew about the presence of the 6 millimetres magnesium oxide, even though you hadn't referred to it?
No, I didn't know. Who knew?
Right.
I didn't know.
Right. But you can't explain why you didn't refer to it, and you've got no confidence that he knew about it. Is that fair?
Only from what I've said previously, that when being explained the different details, it didn't stick with me.
Sitting here now, do you recall how many people within the Celotex business knew about the presence of the 6 millimetres magnesium oxide?
Sitting here today,
Yes.
knowing what I know now, then I would say, yes, I do know. But at that time, no, I didn't.
No, I understand that. Who is it?
But today,
Yes.
as I know now,
Yes.
I would say Paul Evans, Jamie Hayes, John Roper, and Craig Chambers, and Paul Reed.
Right. What is the basis on which you can sit here and say that Craig Chambers knew?
Based on evidence that I've heard through this inquiry.
Right, I see. But not on the basis of your recollection of anything at the time. And same question in relation to Paul Reed.
Yes. Yeah, I did not know.
Well, I think what we'd actually like to know is, thinking back to the time at which you were there, did you see or hear anything to suggest that these people knew?
No. I thinking back to then, I don't remember. I'm not even sure I had a conversation with John Roper about it openly.
Yeah.
I think the only person I had an open conversation with about it was Mr. Hayes.
Yeah. Right, thank you.
I see. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, just to be clear, I wasn't asking you for your comment on what you've seen of the evidence. What I was after was your present recollection today of
Back then.
back then.
Yeah.
And I think you've clarified that. Thank you very much. Can I then go back to the 2016 LABC certificate and just pick up a small point with you there? This is CEL 402062. This is the 2016 certificate. And it's the point about the BBA. If we go to page 5, please, in that, we can see that in the supporting documentation, there are 2 references to BBA documents. BBA letter FR 5000, CG 5021 Lambda classification, BBA spreadsheet for Lambda data. To your knowledge, was there any other BBA certificate or communication relating to RS 5000?
Other than the BR 135 report, if I understand what you're asking me, is that was there any other formal certification for RS 5000 in the market?
No, it's my fault. I'll put the question again. I muddled it up. You could see that there are 2 BBA certificate or documents there, a BBA letter and a BBA spreadsheet. Was there any BBA certification for either FR 5000 or RS 5000 in relation to fire?
BBA certification in relation to fire? Not to my knowledge, no.
Is there any BBA letter, spreadsheet certification in relation to RS 5000 that you knew about at the time?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you. Now, can we then move to February 2015? CEL 403544, please. This is a slideshow called RS 5000 Market Analysis that I think in your witness statement you say you asked Jonathan Room to prepare for your mid-February spin meeting. Yes, that's right. And he sent those to you on the 11th of February 2015, and we can just pick that up at CEL 403543. Just have that. Here's the email from him to you on that day. Hi, Debs, Paul. Please find slides that you can consider for use in the spin meeting on Friday. I've tried to keep it as simplified as possible. Did you present this slideshow at the spin meeting?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
Right. Do you remember who was there?
No.
Right.
I could not.
Who would customarily be at spin meetings at that time?
The managing director, the sales director, the marketing director, the head of marketing at the time.
Right, that's Paul Evans.
Yeah.
Right. The managing director was?
Craig Chambers. Paul Reed.
Sales director?
Paul Reed. And head of development would have been Mr. Joe Mahoney.
Right. Can we go back to the slideshow 403544, please? CEL 403544, page 2. I see the market for RS 5000 being split into 3 defined potential customer tiers, and then slide 3 is the first of those tiers. Tier 1, no use, red. And are you familiar with the text of that?
Yeah.
Yes. So you can see the view, the reason, and the influencer.
Yep.
And you can see that on the right-hand side, the influencer would be client, insurer, building controller, specialist consultant. And then the next page, page 4, is the amber, tier 2, limited use. And the influencer's there, no insurer anymore, but still with a specialist consultant. And then page 5, or slide 5, green, the influencer, main contractor, subcontractor, building control, but no specialist consultant or insurer at all. Did you get the impression from this that this traffic light system of analysing the market meant that green use would be directed at those with the least expertise?
I did understand that, yeah.
You did. And do you think, and I know it's hard to peer into people's minds, but was it your impression that those at the meeting, the spin meeting, to which you presented this slideshow, understood the same?
I can't be sure they did.
Right.
I can't be sure. I mean, the slide shows the tiers are colour-coded.
Right.
There's text in them.
Did you, have a concern at the time that at that point, February 2015, RS 5000 had for some months been sold into a market for which it was not only unsuitable but actually downright unsafe.
I knew that the market. I knew that the product was being sold. I knew it was struggling with how to understand how the product can work with other cladding materials. That's how I understood it.
Right. Now, by this time, just taking it generally, did you understand that the field of application was not going to happen and you needed a desktop study?
I see those as the same things.
I see. All right.
Today I see those as the same things.
Do you remember that in February 2015 you started talking to Exova about them doing you a desktop study?
Yes.
Yes. And I think I can shorten this a little bit. Was that before the spin meeting or after the spin meeting?
Without looking at the dates, I don't know.
Well, we, I think, can look at the spin meeting note, CEL 403557. And you can see here that this is the note of the spin meeting at which you presented Mr. Room's slides. It's very short, but if we go to page 2, we can see that on page 2, you can see RS 5000, the first item there, employ a consultant for a desktop study. And that was an action list with your name underneath it.
Yes.
So can we take it, looking at that although perhaps Exova weren't identified at that stage, there was discussion with you about you employing a desktop?
Absolutely. It was seen as a way of understanding how the product could be used with other cladding materials.
And it says underneath that, arrange meetings with a preference for Warrington. That's Exova, isn't it?
Yes.
Were you already in contact with them? Or was it just a name that had been discussed at the meeting?
I don't know. I can't be sure.
I think, in fact, you may well have been in contact with them already, because I think you'd made contact with them on the 11th of February.
Okay.
Remember that?
No.
You don't. Now, cutting a long story short, you then had a meeting with Franz Papp and Andrew Evans of Exova on the 20th of February.
Yes.
And I don't think you took any notes, but you say in your statement that you think Rob Warren might have done so.
Yes.
It's paragraph 213 at page 57 of your statement.
Yes.
Let's just look at those. CEL 402691, please. We can see there, we just wait for those to come up. We understand that these notes were made by Rob Warren. Do you think that's right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the middle entry, you can see they relate to Warrington certification. You see that?
Yes.
20th of February 2015. Do you think those are the notes of the meeting? I know they're not your notes. Maybe you can't help us, but are they the notes of that meeting?
If I can just take a minute to read them.
Yes, it says Franz Papp,
Yep.
certification engineer, Andrew Evans, key accounts manager, find out about insulation, performs fire resistance test, fire propagation test, class 0 fire data. And it goes down to just below halfway down the page, and then it talks about a housing meeting, which I don't think has got anything to do with what we want to look at.
Yes, that could be. It could be. It doesn't.
And it says on the left-hand side, just about halfway down, need other test data. SBI, that's, I think, do you know what that stands for?
Euroclass test, I think.
Yes, single
Yeah.
burning item Euroclass
Yes.
test. Case-by-case basis assessment. So did you understand that Exova were saying at this stage that a report would be project-specific?
No, I did not understand that.
You didn't?
No.
Right. Did you discuss any particular cladding systems at this meeting?
I don't know. I can't remember, if I'm honest.
All right. Then we move on into March 2015, CEL 403589. And this is an email run of that day. And if we look at the email at the top of the chain, page 1, this is an email from you to Franz Papp on the 18th of March. Hi, Franz, it says there. Please find attached a copy of our 32-page test report for BS8414 Part 2. using Celotex RS5000. Please find also some examples of 4 build-ups we commonly see presented to us at design stage. And this email is copied to Paul Evans and Craig Chambers, isn't it?
Yes.
The 4 of them are slightly different, but only very slightly. Design 1 is an unventilated cavity, whereas 2, 3, and 4 are all ventilated. That's one difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the other differences are principally the cladding material. So design 1 is brickwork. Design 2, which is the ventilated cavity system, is terracotta. Design 3 is cladding laminates A1, and design 4 is cladding aluminium class 0. And you say at the bottom, I think these best represent what's commonly specified, and in particular what NHBC commonly see. The analysis will hopefully help us to better understand the risky parts of cladding systems. It will also provide us with some insights on RS5000 fire behaviour and contribution to this risk. Was that the real reason for the report?
Yes.
Wasn't the real reason that the build-up had been tested didn't actually represent what was commonly specified, and that problem limited sales opportunities?
At the time, when this was all going, when I engaged with it, we were trying to understand how can the product be used outside of its tested system. And I understand these cladding types are after a discussion with the NHBC. And I learnt a lot from talking to Dave White about the different cladding types. To answer your question, as I see it, today, if you can just remind me of your question, please.
Yes. Well, let's just see if I can get it another way. If you go to CEL 401273, this is back to an email we looked at before the lunch break of the 20th of January 2015.
Yeah.
You see, I took you through this, and you remember I showed you the paragraph in the middle of that page. It's actually at the foot of the screen, which says one of the challenges RS5000 has is its field of application. And then in the last sentence, do you remember I showed you, it said this: the build-up tested or its current field of application doesn't represent what is commonly specified in the field and limits specification and sales opportunities.
Yep.
So that being the background, wasn't the real reason that you wanted this desktop study from Exova based on these 4 different designs, that the problem was that the build-up that you'd had tested wasn't representative of what was being commonly used in the market, and that was limiting sales opportunities?
This short-term summary, if you like, is exactly what was the challenge to the product. It was, yes, it wasn't being addressed as a system, it was being addressed as a product.
Yeah.
And what we needed to understand was, how can we use the product outside of the tested system? So it was initially an idea to try and gauge how does the product work outside of its tested system.
But the real reason for wanting to know, I'm suggesting to you that the real driver for this exercise, which was going to cost Celotex money, was to increase sales, not just for the scientific curiosity of finding out.
I think that's fair. We were trying to understand how can the product be used outside of its tested system, and I think the idea was just to try and understand the product a bit better and how it can be used outside of its tested system.
Can we then look at the draft desktop assessment that comes as a result of the instructions that you gave Exova? This is CEL 402040, please. This is a draft, and you can see from the screen, Ms. Berger, that it's dated the 7th of May 2015. It comes to Celotex. Did you see this at the time, do you think?
Yes.
And if we go to page 5, we can see the test evidence that Exova set out.
Yep.
That they took from the BRE test report 295369, which is the 1st of August 2014 full 33-page test.
Yes.
And they set out the test rig. Test specimen was constructed as follows, and there is the now familiar list of ingredients or components in the test specimen. No reference there at all to the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide or the 8 millimetre panels at the level 2 thermal couples or at the top of the rig, is there?
No,
So do we take it that you didn't tell Exova
no, I didn't.
about that?
No, I did not.
You didn't. Why is that?
It's, you know, I can't explain why I didn't, other than it just was out of mind. And that's not a great thing to say. I appreciate that, but it genuinely, it was out of mind. Sorry, no, that's fine. I think now, looking back, knowing, and I think I do recognise that when I was reviewing these documents, it became very, very clear that this was not fair, this was not right.
Did you not think at the time that if Exova were instructed to proceed on the basis that the components of the BRE test were as described in this list, that any resulting desktop study that they produced would be similarly incomplete, flawed, and therefore unreliable?
At the time, as I said, it really wasn't in my mind, and I didn't put that together. Obviously now, I do. Yeah.
Right. So you didn't occur to you at the time, garbage in, garbage out?
No, no. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't. It really didn't.
I mean, the idea here, of course, was to get a report that would broaden the scope of application and make sure that RS5000 went on to more buildings than simply using the test report would allow.
I think a lot of the feedback we were getting leading up to this report was based on further testing. So the BRE had said to us, we need more test data, and it was understood that more test data. And we were, as I said, if I had been involved with this product before launch, we should have got more test data for it. All this work should have done. In my head, we got this to understand roughly how can the product be used outside of its tested system. What cladding materials, roughly, going from worse, very, very safe, which is brick, which is highly cementitious and very thick, down to the 3 millimetre aluminium, which has the non-fire rated filling. So they were specifically chosen to gauge which cladding materials were safe depending on their sort of build-up. So as we go through it, one of them I think it's terracotta, I can't quite remember, but it's less cementitious, it's still cementitious but thinner, and then the Alucobond I think is the fire-rated cladding. So it was to try, in my mind, it was to try and understand how would Celotex fare against brickwork? How would Celotex fare against the very worst, which is ACM 3 millimetres without the fire-rated cladding?
But Ms. Berger, this doesn't make any sense with great respect. If you're telling Exova to proceed on the basis of the BRE test report,
yes.
And that test report had a material omission, then any desktop study which would broaden the application would be misleading and fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, I accept that.
But you must have known that at the time, no?
It didn't, I did not put it together.
How can that be?
No, I'm sorry, I know.
If we go down to page 9, we can see what the Exova thought of the alternative designs, and they all passed other than aluminium. And I'm summarising. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And if we look at the conclusions in relation to aluminium on page 9, just above general conclusions. Based on the considerations outlined above, when alternative design 4 with an external aluminium sheet cladding over a ventilated cavity is tested in accordance with BS 8414 Part 2, it can't be judged with certainty to meet the performance requirements as outlined in BR 135. So at least you knew from that point that RS 5000 should not be used with aluminium.
Yes.
Even on the basis of the flawed
yes.
test. Now, I take it, but all the others, of course, as we can see from the conclusions, were passed, weren't they? Designs 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
Yes. Now, do I take it, I think we can take it, that you never went back to Exova and corrected the misapprehension that they had about the list of components
No, I
in the
didn't.
test? And the report was formally issued on the 26th of May 2015, wasn't it? I can show you that. It's at CEL 401116.
Okay.
I've put the question to you before showing you the document, but you can see the document, 26th of May 2015. Is that the final version of this document? I think it's the version we've seen.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I would imagine so, yes, it's the final
Right.
version.
And we can see no changes from the draft version. Do we take it that you never went back to Exova and asked them to make any changes?
I definitely discussed this report with Jamie,
Right. What was the upshot?
possibly Rob Warren.
Right. What was the upshot of those discussions?
It wasn't to change the, not that I can recall, to change the 6 and
Right.
the,
And so this final report was as flawed
absolutely.
as the draft.
Yeah.
Do you know to what use this report was then put in the business?
Well, we thought it would give us an understanding of how RS 5000 could be used outside of its tested system. However, when we went to see the NHBC, that we were made aware of how little we knew, and really, it really was not something that they could take seriously.
Indeed, and we'll come to that in just a second. Before I do, do you know, to your knowledge, whether the Exova report was ever used by Celotex to promote the use of RS 5000 in any of the rain screen build-ups, design 1, 2 or 3, that passed in this test?
Yes, I think there was some discussion that the brick outer leaf, I was asked to, later on, I was asked to isolate the brick outer leaf.
Right.
Yeah.
But you didn't. I mean, was this, to your knowledge, was this desktop study actually ever used in real life to sell RS 5000?
With all the four cladding, I don't think it was. No.
Right.
I hope.
You mentioned the NHBC meeting in your statement at page 61, paragraph 230, and you date it as the 19th of May, page 61, paragraph 230.
Mm-hmm.
If we could just look at that. You say, I was invited to the meeting. I've been working on the Exova desktop study, and say my role was to talk about the draft Exova report, and at that stage it was a draft. As I became more experienced working with desktop studies, I learnt the level of detail required for a desktop study. I was not an expert in the details to be able to explain them. I was just aware what was required. And you go on to say you didn't think it was really a desktop study looking back on it. When you say that it wasn't really a desktop study, do you mean that that's because it's not for a specific project?
Yes.
I see. But just outline designs, as we've seen in the
Yes.
instruction email.
Yeah.
And if you go over the page, please, to paragraph 231, you say that at the meeting, you said it didn't go as outlined in the agenda, you say there in the second line, we presented the draft report from Exova looking at the 4 different cladding types. NHBC expressed their concerns strongly about our lack of understanding about desktop studies. And firstly, they said any assessments should take into account the whole of the project. Is that the point you're making? That these were not project specific, they were too generic to be of any use?
Yes.
Right. And then if we go to CEL 401122, we can see that Paul Evans sends Rob Warren an email copied to you on the 8th of June, response back from NHBC. I haven't studied the detail yet, but probably need us to respond once we have answers to the questions, including feedback from Exova. try and find some time to discuss. And below that, you can see that there's an email, if you just go lower down the page on the screen, from Graham Perrior of the 8th of June 2015 to Paul Evans, copy to Dave White and John Lewis. Hi, Paul. This remains work in progress, but I can provide with you with a few observations. We've previously commented in careful detail on BRE Fire Test Report 295369, which appears to be the only fire test report released. Query. Please advise if there are others. Furthermore, we have previously explained that this BRE test was not fully representative of a typical rain screen facade. However, we are still seeking to review exactly what has been recently assessed by Exova in their desk study. And then over the page, there's more. We're looking for provide a critical breakdown, etc. And then in the penultimate paragraph, therefore it appears that the basis for Exova's analysis does not reflect either a true model of a ventilated rain screen facade or take fully into account the fact that a large part of the Marley rain screen caught fire. Now, was there a discussion within Celotex with Paul Evans, as indicated in Paul Evans's email that comes to you, about this response from the NHBC? Do you remember?
I expect there was, yeah.
How did this end with the NHBC?
Well, they were looking for more. Well, we contacted Franz Papp at Exova, and we gave him the details about the lack of ventilation, the lack of gaps between the cladding facades. We said to him that, could you review your analysis based on there being reduced amount of ventilation going into the cavity.
And what did he say?
He said, yes, he'd do that.
Did they do that?
Yes.
And what did they produce a revised report?
No, they produced an email.
Right.
And he listed his reasons.
Right. And did you take that back to NHBC?
I think, yes, I think both Rob did or Paul did, one of the two.
And what was their reaction?
I can't honestly, I honestly don't, I can't recall.
Right. Can I just show you one more document?
Yes.
CEL 402378. And this is a document published by the NHBC in July 2016 entitled Acceptability of Common Wall Constructions Containing Combustible Materials in High-Rise Buildings.
Mm-hmm.
When this was published, were you familiar with it?
Not overly, no.
Not over.
I knew bits of it, and I relied on other people to really help me with it.
And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, it refers to common wall and facade types accepted by NHBC as a title, and then says the following common wall and facade constructions are acceptable to NHBC without the need to provide an option 3 assessment, that's desktop study, providing that the design specification and installation meets the minimum specifications set out in the following appendices. And then Appendix 3 is aluminium composite panels.
Yes.
At the time, were you surprised by this change in approach?
Yes.
Do you know what caused it?
No.
Was your surprise shared by others within Celotex?
Probably.
To the best of your knowledge?
Yeah. Yes, we were, at the end of the day, it was like all the sales queries. I mean, from handover from John Roper, the emphasis was on NHBC, on NHBC, projects. It was a big goal for the company. And in my time working with RS 5000, it was all that was, NHBC, the product wasn't allowed, couldn't be used on these projects because of how the NHBC viewed the Celotex test. So when this came through, it was, I didn't really, it was a surprise.
Do you know, from your own knowledge at the time, of any efforts made by Celotex by way of lobbying or discussions with the NHBC that led them to publish this guidance?
No.
Ms. Berger, thank you very much. I've come to the end of my questions, Mr. Chairman. I've come to the end of my questions, and I have not been true to my word, I'm afraid.
Never mind.
But there it is. So might this be a moment for the break?
Well, Ms. Berger, as you heard, Council thinks he's come to the end of the questions, but we always have a break at this point to give him time to just review everything, and also to give those who are not here but may have questions to suggest to put them to Council. So we'll break off now for 10 minutes or thereabouts. Well, I'll say we'll come back at 10 to 3, see if there are any more questions for you then.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Please go with the usher. Thank you very much. Right, Mr. Bennett, 10 to 3 then, please. Yes, would you ask Ms. Berger to come back, please? Okay. Right, Ms. Berger, we'll see if Mr. Millett's found any more questions for you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just one. Between May of 2015 and the July of 2016, when we can see that the NHBC published their guidance, between those 2 months, two points in time, 14-month period or so, did Celotex continue to sell RS5000?
Yes.
What was the basis on which it was selling RS5000? Did it continue to sell it on the basis of the marketing literature and the BRE test and classification reports?
Desktop studies. We were becoming more, we were working with projects,
Right.
real life projects now, understanding how the reality of using RS in the different elevations of a project, not just in one sort of application isolated from the project.
Right.
And I suppose there was a growing confidence that there seemed to be a process. I mean, this is how I understand it. There seems to be a growing confidence that there was a process to understand how the test could be used outside, could be used with other cladding materials, how RS could be used with other cladding materials.
Now, you were the project manager throughout that period. Roughly, are you able to tell us into how many projects above 18 metres RS5000 was sold?
I couldn't tell you. We didn't know.
Right. And is it the case that the desktop studies were done for above 18-metre buildings?
I think so, yes.
And is it also the case, I think it would follow from our discussions earlier, that in each of those cases, did they rely on the BRE test that had been done in 2014?
So what can you...
Each of those desktop studies relied on
Yes, they relied on
test.
yes, they did.
So does it follow from that in the case of each of those projects where there was a desktop, those desktops were flawed because they relied on an incomplete,
Yep, I accept
misleading BRE test?
I accept that today, yeah.
Right. And to your knowledge, did you, as the product manager, ever write to any of the architects, designers, contractors, building owners on those projects and tell them that the desktop study they had used was based on a misleadingly incomplete BRE test report and
No.
classification?
I did not write to them myself.
Why is that?
Because I didn't. By the time we got down to working more fluently and understanding the process of using the product with these different projects, the NHB concerns of the ventilated facade and the orientation of the board, in my mind, Franz Papp had addressed that, and the idea of the other areas which were reinforced wasn't in my mind.
You didn't think it appropriate to write to those who relied on desktop studies and say your desktop study is fatally flawed?
There are a number of, in hindsight, there are a number of things I wish I had done a lot differently. But maybe if I had spoken more about this with Jamie and I could have together confronted the management as such and said, look, we know this is what's going on. I don't know why we didn't support each other, but we just didn't, and we just didn't really talk about it much after.
So I think the answer to my question is you didn't think it necessary or appropriate to write to those who'd relied on desktop studies and warn them that the desktop study they were using was fatally flawed. You didn't?
I didn't.
Thank you. Well, Ms. Berger, thank you very much for your evidence. I'm extremely grateful to you for coming here today and helping the inquiry with its investigations. So thank you very much.
And on behalf of the panel, may I also thank you for coming here. I'm sorry we kept you longer than we indicated that we might need to, but that's just the way of it sometimes. And it's been very helpful to hear your evidence. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'd like to go to the usher now. You're free to go. Thank you. And at this point, I think we have to break for a short time for some housekeeping.
I'm sorry, yes, we do. Yes.
That's right, that's understood.
And the next witness will be taken by Miss Grange.
Yes, right, thank you very much. Right, well, someone can come and tell us when we're ready to continue.
Yes, very good.
Now, Miss Grange, it's nearly 3:10.
Yes,
and
Mr.
it
Chairman.
seems to us that, subject to the views of others in the room, it would be preferable not to have another break this afternoon.
Yes, we've had
Otherwise,
the same
we'll be
thought.
going out again in about half an hour or 40 minutes, and that will disrupt things more than I think is sensible. So,
Yes, I've checked with people in the room and everyone's content with that.
right.
So thank you.
Is our shorthand writer content? Good. And I think I thank you very much indeed. And I'll take it that those who support us from the room next door are also content. So, yes, what
Thank
comes
you.
next?
Yes, so our next Kingspan witness is Mr. Philip Heath, please.
Thank you.
Please take the Bible in your right hand and read out the oath.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heath. Would you like to sit down and make yourself comfortable, please? Yes, Miss Grange, when you're ready.
Yes, thank you. Yes, could you give the inquiry your full name, please?
Philip John Heath.
Yes, and can I start by thanking you for attending this public inquiry to give your evidence? It is very much appreciated. If you have any difficulty understanding anything I'm asking you, please ask me to repeat the question or put the point in a different way. If you feel you need a break at any time, please do tell us. And the other thing I would ask you to do is try and keep your voice up, because the lady sitting to your right there is taking a verbatim note of everything we say. And so if you can try and keep your voice up to the microphones, that would be great.
Will do.
Can I just interrupt to say, Mr. Heath, I should have said this when you came in, but I suspect you've been waiting quite a long time here to come and give your evidence, haven't you? If you have, I'm sorry that we've kept
No.
you waiting, but I'm afraid these things happen.
No, that's fine.
Yes, I'm sorry, Miss Grange.
No, that's okay. Now, you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry. It's in a folder on the desk in front of you, and it will also appear on the screen. If we can go to KIN 3020709, there we have it there. And if we go over into page 82, onto the last page, we can see there it's dated the 15th of October 2019. And is that your signature?
It is.
Thank you. And have you read your statement recently?
I have.
And are the contents true?
They are.
And have you discussed your statement or the evidence you're going to give with anybody before coming here today?
I haven't.
Thank you. Now, just to start with some questions about your background. You tell us in your witness statement that you've worked for Kingspan Insulation since 1992, is that right?
That's correct. Continuous employment, yes.
Yes. And that you're currently the Divisional Business Development Director for Kingspan,
That's
is that
correct.
right? Yeah. And before joining Kingspan, you tell us that you worked for Coolag, an insulation manufacturer, which was later acquired by the Kingspan Group, is that right?
That's correct. Coolag Pearlboard Limited.
Coolag Pearlboard Limited, thank you. And if we look at paragraph 2.2 of your witness statement on page 2, going over to page 3, you tell us that before you worked, or I think it was actually during the time you worked at Coolag, you did a BTEC qualification in building studies. I think it goes over into the next page. As part of your employment with Coolag, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Now, we understand from paragraph 2.4 of your witness statement, which is also on that page, that your first role for Kingspan was as a technical advisor. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were promoted to technical services manager in 1993. Is that right?
Yes.
And at that point, you reported directly to Peter Wilson, who was the managing director of Kingspan. Is that right?
Not at that time, no.
Ah, okay. Was that when you were promoted, you then reported?
No, from 1992, I reported to the marketing director at the time, a gentleman called Frank Fitzmaurice.
I see. Okay, thank you. And then at paragraph 2.8 of your witness statement on page 4, if we just bring that up, you explain that in 2001 you were promoted to technical manager. And at the same time, Andrew Pack took over your role as technical services manager. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what you've helpfully done here below that paragraph is give us an organogram showing the structure of the technical department between 2001 and 2009. That's what we see here, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And you're in the middle there. And you sit above Andrew Pack, Technical Services Manager, and also Ivor Meredith, Project Manager. Do you see that on the left?
Yes,
And then above you is Malcolm Rochford, the Technical Director. Is that correct?
that's correct, yes.
Yeah. And at paragraph 2.14 of your witness statement on page 6, you tell us that you would send a composite monthly report to Malcolm Rochford outlining key activities. That's right, yes?
Yes.
Now, other than that report, how regularly would you report to Mr. Rochford?
We would have regular, I think we're called technical lamination meetings, where I'd meet him at those once a month.
Yeah.
And have various, numerous contacts with him throughout the month,
Yeah,
either through telephone or meeting him in the office.
yeah. So you were regularly updating him and reporting to him?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, on page 5 of your witness statement, at paragraph 2.11, you explain that you set up the technical projects team and you promoted Ivor Meredith to be the leader of that team. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And you say you were involved in setting up the technical projects team in the first line, and you promoted Ivor Meredith to be the project manager then in 2005. When was that team actually set up? Can you help us on that? Was it set up before Mr. Meredith was appointed project manager for that team, or at that time?
No, I mean, Ivor had been managing some projects prior to that, and then we established that as an official position within the organisation. So it would be around 2005 that he was officially given that title, I would imagine.
Yes.
But prior to that, he was undertaking some project work for us.
Yes, thank you. And you go on and you explain that the technical projects team became responsible for fire testing and certification of products both before and after they were placed on the market. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And then, still looking in that paragraph, about 8 lines down, just on the right-hand side, can you see a sentence beginning, together with other managers? Do you see that there?
Yes.
So you say there, together with other managers, I would often initiate relevant projects and often be present for any initial meetings. But thereafter, Ivor and the relevant senior technical advisor, technical projects leader, would largely be responsible for them on a day-to-day basis. Ivor Meredith produced monthly reports on the work of the technical projects team, so I was kept up to speed with the main ongoing projects. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And those other managers that you refer to at the beginning, you say together with other managers, you'd often initiate projects. Who were those other managers that you're referring to there?
That would be business development managers,
Yeah.
Malcolm Rochford. So, sales managers, business development managers, and Malcolm Rochford.
Yeah,
So he was seen as a business resource.
I see, yeah. And you tell us at paragraph 2.13 on page 6 of your statement that you describe it as a general supervisory role. You say that in the end of there, but before that you say, although Ivor Meredith and Andrew Pack were given a large degree of autonomy, they would naturally approach me with any issues or queries, and I maintained a general supervisory role. Do you see that there?
I do, yes.
And when you say that they were given a large degree of autonomy, can you help us a little bit more with what exactly you mean by that?
Well, I certainly didn't micromanage them. I think that's what I meant to say. They were managing a project. They would report back to me on at least a monthly basis on how those projects were proceeding. So from that point of view, maintaining a supervisory role was really offering advice and mentoring them when they came back with some questions in relation to the project, if they had any.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. And then if we go over to page 7 of your statement, paragraph 2.23, what you tell us there is that the evidence you've provided in your statement is focused on the period before early 2010, because at that time you moved to Australia and you weren't closely involved, certainly with the K15 product after that time.
I wasn't, no.
No. So that's the period of time that you can assist us on the K15 product, is that
Yes,
right?
circa December 2009, I officially left that
Right.
position.
Yeah, I see.
And leading up to that, I was probably involved a lot in the Australian acquisition and the business prior to that. So there was a lead into my departure, so to speak.
Yeah. And your current position within Kingspan, is that a UK-based position?
No, it's a global-based position. I really have very little to do with the UK market now.
Right.
It's mainly concentrated in the US, identifying business opportunities, key account potentials, and also looking at vertical integration of businesses into Kingspan and highlighting potential opportunities in that respect.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Now, I want to ask you some questions now about your knowledge and understanding of the relevant regulatory framework at the time that you were involved with the K15 product. You explained to us in your witness statement, for the transcript, this is on page 33 at paragraph 5.2, that you understood about functional requirement B4 of the building regulations. We can look at that if you like. So go to page 33, paragraph 5.2. So you say, in preparation of this witness statement, I've revisited the building regulations as they were during the period when I was technical manager. In this period, I understood that section B4 of Schedule 1 required the external cladding systems to comply with the functional requirement on external fire spread. And then you set out that functional requirement there. Do you see that underneath that? Shall adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And I think you're telling us that in the time you were involved with K15, you did understand there to be that functional requirement. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And approved document B on fire safety, what was your understanding at the time about what the purpose of approved document B was?
Approved document B was related to fire and obviously health and safety surrounding the fire and the requirements of building components and assemblies to meet the guidance note of ADB.
Yeah. During the period 2001 to 2009, did you ever attend any training or receive any training, formal or informal, on the building regulations and the approved document B?
Not that I recall, but I may have attended something at the BRE. They occasionally ran courses on building regs, but I have no recollection of attending.
No, yeah. During that period, do you recall actually reading yourself the guidance set out in approved document B on fire safety?
I would have done at the time.
Yeah. And would that have included section B4 on external fire spread?
I would imagine so, yes.
Yeah. Were you aware throughout your time as technical manager that there was particular guidance for buildings over 18 metres?
It would have become more increasingly evident as we travelled through the decade, yes.
Yes, yes. And did you attempt to keep up to date with any relevant changes to the regulatory regime, including that guidance?
During that period of time, yes.
Yeah. And were you also aware of the publication BR 135 at that time?
I would have been aware of that then, yes.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. If we could look at the 2007 version of approved document B, that's at CLG 1607, and I want to look on page 95. And if we look in the bottom right-hand part of that page, we can see at 12.5, We get there in the first part of 12.5 a warning, the external envelope of the building should not provide a medium for fire spread, etc. The use of combustible materials in the cladding system and extensive cavities may present such a risk in tall buildings. And then we see there it says external walls should either meet the guidance given in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 or meet the performance criteria given in the BRE report, BR 135. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And that would have been referring to the BR 135 second edition, which came out in 2003. And then if we go over, and that paragraph, is that a paragraph that you would have read and that you remember being familiar with?
I would have done at the time. Yeah.
And then if we go over to page 96 and we look at paragraph 12.7, there, insulation materials products is the heading. It makes clear there, in a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And do you remember reading that at the time?
At the time, I would have done, yes.
Yeah. And just to be clear, you understood, didn't you, that K15 was a combustible insulation material at the time?
Yes, I did.
And it's not and has never been a material of limited combustibility, has it?
No, it hasn't.
Did you understand at the time that that phrase, limited combustibility, had a special meaning and a special definition as defined in the later parts of approved document B?
Yes, I did.
And that you had to satisfy certain test requirements in order to be a material of limited combustibility?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. If we can go now within your statement to page 31 and paragraph 4.50, you tell us that in the period after the 2005 8414 test, that we will come on to talk about that. You say this, that in the period after that, we found ourselves explaining to customers the alternative route to compliance set out in paragraph 12.5 of ADB, which provided that the suitability of combustible materials for use over 18 metres could be demonstrated by way of BS 8414 testing where the BR 135 criteria had been met. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
So you're telling us that you often had to explain that alternative route to your customers, is that right?
Yes.
And you use the word alternative, if we look back at the bottom of the previous page. In the second line, you're using the word alternative there as it being an alternative route to compliance. Did you understand that in order to be used in a building with a story over 18 metres, either all insulation materials should be of limited combustibility or the entire external wall system had to meet the criteria in BR 135 when tested to BS 8414?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. And those are separate routes, aren't they? Separate routes to compliance.
Yes, they are.
Prior to Kingspan's first test to BS 8414 Part 1 in May 2005, do you remember actually ever reading through the test standard itself?
I would have done, but I can't remember specifically sitting down and reading it.
And you'd said you were familiar with BR 135 second edition. Would you have read that document?
I would have done at the time, yes.
Yeah. If we can bring that up, BRE 405554. I think we go to the next page. There we go. That's the second edition. It came out in 2003, this edition. The third edition came out later in 2013, just to give you that context. And if I just want to take you to a couple of passages within this. If we go to page 20 of this, which is Annex A, the performance criteria for BS 8414 Part 1. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then halfway down that page, there's a heading Principle of Test, BS 8414. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then under that heading, it says immediately there, the test facility has been designed to allow the external fire performance of both applied and supported non-load-bearing external cladding systems to be determined. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you see that it's referring to systems there.
Yes.
See that? And it goes on, the test facility allows external cladding systems to be installed as close to typical end-use conditions as possible. Do you see that there? In the next line down from that first
Yes, I do,
paragraph.
yes.
So it says the test facility allows external cladding systems to be installed as close to typical end-use conditions as possible. Do you see that?
Yes.
So did you understand that to mean that the test facility in the 8414 test is allowing the system to be installed as close as possible to how it's going to be used in real life on a building? Do you see that there?
Yes.
Yeah. And you understood that at the time?
Yes.
And if we can go to page 22, here we have the performance criteria and classification method at the top of the page. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And if we just read that first paragraph, it says the performance criteria and classification method set out here are based on the 8414 Part 1 test method. The primary concern when setting the performance criteria for these systems is that the spread of fire away from the initial fire source and the rate of fire spread. And then it says if fire spread away from the initial fire source occurs, the rate of progress of fire spread or tendency for collapse should not unduly hinder intervention by the emergency services. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And then it says this, the performance of the system under investigation. So I just want to focus on the word system under investigation. Again, did you understand when you were reading this that what this was testing was a particular system that was being investigated in this test?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And it's evaluated against 3 criteria: external fire spread, internal fire spread, and mechanical performance. And did you understand at the time that the first 2 predominantly relate to temperature readings, but that third element, mechanical performance, required a risk assessment of the mechanical performance of the system? Do you see that there?
Yes.
And did you understand that at the time?
I would have done at the time, yes.
And I think if we go over to the next page in the guidance there, under mechanical performance, we can see we've got those 3 criteria there. And it says this, no failure criteria have been set for mechanical performance. However, details of any system collapse, spalling, delamination or flaming debris should be included in the test report. The nature of the mechanical failure should be considered as part of the overall risk assessment when specifying the system. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So again, were you clear when you read this that it was a particular system and that what needed to happen as part of this assessment was an overall risk assessment, including how it had behaved mechanically?
At the time, yes, I would.
Yeah. Now, if we go back to your witness statement on page 34, paragraph 5.5, you say this, you say, I do not recall what my understanding of BR 135 was historically, although I certainly would have had, at the very least, a general understanding of the requirements at the time I was dealing with K15. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you go on to say that you've now reminded yourself, you say this in the next paragraph, you've now reminded yourself now of the requirements and you've set out your understanding below. And then you set out, particularly at paragraph 5.9, below that, your understanding of the system and how it can be classified as having met the BR 135 criteria. Do you see that there? So it's got to have been tested to the full test duration without early termination of the test. You're talking about the thermocouple temperatures at B, and then the fire must not penetrate. And then you've also got at 5.10 below that, you say separately, continued burning of the tested system following extinguishment of the fire source will be referenced both in the test and classification reports, as well as details of system collapse, detachment, delamination, flames, dripping, etc. And you say mechanical integrity is considered an integral part of the general risk assessment. So we've got that in your statement as well.
Yes.
You see that there.
Yes, I
Now
do.
you say that you've refreshed your understanding of that when you were preparing your witness statement. Would you have had that understanding at the time you were the technical manager and carrying out these 8414 tests?
I would have had knowledge of that, yes.
Yeah. And did you understand that 8414 and the BR135 classification criteria are not intended to guarantee the fire performance of any individual component or product used within that tested system? Did you understand that? That it was a holistic assessment of the entire system?
I would have understood that, yes.
Yeah. And did you also understand that you can't take a successful tested system and pull out of that one component or one product and then in a different system say, well, it's okay to use this product because you can now call it a product of limited combustibility?
That would have been correct, though within that BR135, I think there was some wording to say as close as possible.
When you say as close as possible, sorry, what do you mean
I think
by
within the BR135, I think that they're from memory and from preparing the statement, I think there is some wording that said the construction should be as close as possible.
that? Yes, but I'm just on a slightly different point, which is, do you agree that what you can't do is test a system successfully to 8414 and BR135 and then pick a product, one product out of that successful test and put it in another system or another building and say, well, because that was on a successfully tested system, we're now going to treat that as a product of limited combustibility, and so it can go without question onto another building. Did you understand that?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, thank you. Now, given you say you understood at the time that you were technical manager that the whole system had to meet the performance criteria in BR135, can you just help us about how you refer to this in your witness statement in a number of places? If we look at paragraph 311 of your statement on page 11, and if we pick it up in the fourth line, there's a sentence beginning, I understood. Can you see that there?
Yes.
And if we can just read that together, you say, I understood that the 2005 BS 8414 test demonstrated that K15 was suitable in principle to use over 18 metres, provided it was used in combination with a non-combustible cladding and non-combustible backing sheathing board. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And it was really the use of the word in principle. Can you just help us as to, if you understood the concept I was just discussing with you, how you can say there that the BS 8414 test demonstrated that K15 was suitable in principle to use over 18 metres, provided it was used in combination with a non-combustible cladding and a non-combustible backing board. Mm-hmm. You see that there?
Yes. I think at the time when we were trying to commission this work, we were one of the, I think if not the first, one of the earliest manufacturers who were testing to that British standard.
Yeah.
And I think there was a lot of interest from the certification bodies on that test. And from memory, I think it was the BRE who actually suggested we test using that construction or system as the pilot test.
I see. So, yes, I was going to come to this. So, are you saying that it was suggested to you by the BRE that if you tested that kind of simplified system, let's call it that, that then you would be able to extrapolate from that and use it in other applications?
At the time, that was the inference from the BRE, yes.
And when you say at the time, what time period are you referring to? Are you referring to before the 2005 test was done in May 05?
Yes, it would have been.
Yeah. Did there come a time when you became aware that that wasn't the case? That in fact, either because the BRE told you it or because you'd worked it out elsewhere, you couldn't test K15 in a representative configuration and then extrapolate onto other applications?
Well, obviously, we took the advice or the suggestion from the BRE to go down that route of that particular assembly. I think that was also probably to give them some technical data as well in relation to how that particular test performed. With regards to when we realised, I think after the test was completed, I'm not sure of the period of time, but
Yes.
the BRE, I believe, retracted their original suggestion.
Yes. Mr. Meredith described it as moved the goalposts. Is that
Right.
a fair characterisation of what happened?
Well, that's certainly an analogy that they just changed their mind.
Yeah. We'll come back to that, but that's very helpful. Thank you. Just briefly on Class Naught, National Class
Right,
Naught.
sorry, before we move on, can I just ask for a little bit more help on this expression, suitable in principle to use over 18 metres? I mean, what exactly do you mean by that? Sorry, this is line 5 of paragraph 311.
Yeah, 5 up from the bottom, I think.
Right, sorry, yes, I've got that, yes.
All right.
I think what I was trying to say there is perhaps suitable in principle, might be slightly the wrong word, but I think it was probably representative rather than in principle. It was representative of a system to use over 18 metres.
I mean, the position in reality was that it would be suitable for use over 18 metres if incorporated into a system of the exactly as tested. Is that not right?
That's correct. I mean, the 8414 is obviously it is a system test, so
Yeah.
I think by default that it's a system test. That would be the inference. Yes.
Yes, right. Thank you.
Yeah, but when you use in principle there, were you trying to express what your understanding had been before the 2005 test?
I was probably trying to put in words what the suggestion that the BRE was giving to us.
Yeah.
That it was, that would be a representative system of a non-combustible cladded rain screen.
But you later understood that wasn't right, didn't you?
Well, they certainly retracted that comment, yes.
Yeah, but also if you've read 8414 and you've read BR135, it doesn't say that anywhere, does it?
It doesn't, no.
No. Now, National Class Naught, I just want to ask you a little bit about Class Naught. You cover this at paragraph 511 of your witness statement on page 35. There you tell us there are two routes by which a Class Naught rating may be achieved. The first route applies to materials of limited combustibility, which are automatically Class Naught. And then you say later in that paragraph, in the final sentence, the second route is via testing to BS 476, Part 6 and 7. Do you see that there? And again, was that something you understood at the time that you were technical manager, that there were these
I would have done, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you understood what National Class Naught meant?
Yes.
Yeah. Was it your understanding that at all times between 2001 and when you departed in late 2009, test data existed on the basis of which K15 could be said to have a Class Naught classification?
Sorry, can you just repeat
sorry,
that?
it's a long question. Was it your understanding that at all times between 2001 and, say, 2010, test data existed on the basis of which K15 could be said to have a Class 0 classification. So did you understand during that time and throughout that time that there was test evidence supporting K15 having a Class 0 classification?
Yes.
You did. And can you help us as to what relevance Class 0, National Class 0 had to using a thermal installation material in buildings over 18 metres?
Yeah, I can't recall specifically.
Because what I'd like some help with is why we see Class 0, National Class 0, very prominently stated in K15's marketing literature throughout that time.
Right.
Which I'll take you to later. Why that was so relevant, and then why it would be relevant for buildings over 18 metres.
From memory, I'm not sure how relevant it was for over 18 metres, but it was one of those, and probably still remains, though it's obsolete now, but it certainly at that time, you know, it used to be, say, in the 80s, architects and specifiers, it was like a peace of mind accreditation or test. So originally, going back to the 80s, it was a Class 1, and then it moved to this Class O, which was obviously Part 6 and 7. And it was just really a general classification that architects and specifiers asked for. They might not have realised why, but it was just one of those tests that they said, what's the surface spread of flame rating, whether it's required or not?
Yeah.
We often got that question.
Yeah.
So I think it was to satisfy some of the routine questions we may have got that we put that in the literature.
I see. Yeah. Just moving on now, I want to ask you some questions about the development and the launch of Cooltherm K15, which you've covered in your witness statement. If we can look at page 17, paragraph 3.29. You say, I believe that K15 was marketed as an option for use in external cladding systems on buildings with a floor over 18 metres in England, Wales and Scotland, following and on the basis of the 2005 8414 test. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And are you basing that belief on the fact that the test carried out in May 2005 was the first large-scale test to 8414 carried out by Kingspan on a system which incorporated the K15 product?
That would have been the case, yes.
Yeah. Is it your belief that prior to that test in 2005, K15 would not have been a product which would be suitable to enter into the over 18 metre market?
Yes, that would have been my understanding.
Now, I want to take you now to an activity report produced by Ivor Meredith and dated January 2004. It's at KIN 405054. We can see at the top, it's activity report number 1 by Ivor Meredith, January 26, 2004. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And is this the kind of written report you would frequently receive from Mr. Meredith?
I would have received something similar from various members of the technical team at the time, yes.
Yeah. And then if we look at the third bullet point down, it's at the bottom of that page, under the heading Phenolic Development K15, we can see it says this. It says, looking at the potential for a Class B phenolic product that will achieve acceptability for above 18 metres in facade construction by building regulations. The product has been made pentane blown with a heavier grade foil facing 25 micron. I will be testing within the SBI on the 29th of January 04, and if successful results are obtained, we will be moving towards a large-scale testing scenario, BS 8414, performed in conjunction with steel frame system market leaders Metzec. Do you see that there?
I do, yes.
Now, as far as you were aware, was K15 being marketed or suggested for use over 18 metres at any stage prior to the development of that pentane blown heavier grade foil facer version of K15?
I can't recall specifically.
You can't help. And can you help us as to whether Mr. Meredith was talking about a pentane blown foam with a heavier grade foil facer for general production at that time?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah,
Just reading the
what we're
paragraph.
interested in is whether Mr. Meredith was talking about a pentane blown foam with a heavier grade foil, which is what he's referring to there.
Yes.
Whether you can help us as to whether the intention was for that to be in general production by Kingspan.
I would have thought so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm assuming that Class B relates to the Euro class that was, I don't think it was enforced then, but I presume that's what he's talking about.
Yes, and I think that's reinforced by the fact that the reference to SBI later in that paragraph is single burning item, which is one of the test methods under that European classification system. Do you see that there?
I do, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you now some questions about some of the details of the 2005 test to BS 8414. It was carried out at the BRE on the 31st of May 2005 to BS 84 Part 1, yes, which is on a masonry structure. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, yes.
Yeah. And if we go to your witness statement again at page 22, paragraph 411, you tell us in that end of that first line that you also supervised the commissioning of the 2005 test, which was project managed by Mr. Meredith as technical project manager. Do you see that there? So you say you supervised the commissioning of it.
Sorry, which paragraph again?
Yeah, sorry, 4.11 at the very top of that page. You tell us you supervised the commissioning of the 2005
Right,
test.
yes.
Can you just help us by what exactly you meant by that, supervise the commissioning of it? What was your involvement?
I'm assuming the commissioning of it meant signing it off as a project and ensuring the funds were available from the technical budget and approval from the directors of the business, because it was quite an investment at the time, probably one of the biggest fire tests we'd done. So I think
Yes.
commissioning it relates to, ensuring the funding was available from the budget.
Yeah. Can you remember who initiated the project to test 84141?
I believe that was probably initiated from the business development team at the time.
Yeah. And can you help as to why they were initiating that project?
They obviously saw opportunities in that particular sector above 18 metres.
Yeah. And you go on, in fact, in that, sorry, it's a different paragraph on your witness statement. If we go on page 11 and look at paragraph 311, you tell us in the first lines of that paragraph, as the demand for products suitable for use over 18 metres increased, we commissioned a test of a system incorporating K15 to the test method, BS 8414 Part 1, which was conducted in May 2005. Do you see that there? So
Yes.
you're saying there it's as the demand for products suitable for use over 18 metres increased. So that's consistent with what you've just told us. Now, what did Kingspan hope to get out of that test? What were they hoping to achieve from it?
An opportunity to explore the opportunities for the market above 18 metres.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Meredith has told us in his evidence to this inquiry that this test in May 2005 was part of a planned series of tests to explore the performance of K15 in large-scale systems. Do you agree with that that was what was going on here?
It was certainly... Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, Mr. Meredith told us that this test in May 2005 was part of a planned series of tests to explore the performance of K15 in large-scale systems.
Yes, we weren't seeing this as the first test we were going to do. We were looking at other opportunities with other component suppliers as well who were in that marketplace.
Yes, thank you. And it's right, isn't it, that you'd started, in fact, with what's sometimes called the naked test, a test where all that was on the rig was just K15 with no exterior. That was in December 2004. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, yes.
Yeah. And Mr. Meredith's evidence was that this next step with outer building boards was never intended to be representative of a real-life external cladding system. Do you agree with that?
It was under the advice of the BRE, it was a representative of a non-combustible cladding system. Yes.
You're clear that was the advice of the BRE, are you? That it was representative of a real-life cladding system?
From a non-combustible cladding panel.
Let's just look at what Mr. Meredith says for a moment. If we go day 75, page 59, I want to pick it up around line 15. And so if we look at line 15 there in the middle of that page, I ask him the question, you have said in your witness statement, just for the transcript, and then I give the reference, the decision to carry out this test was a collective decision with all senior members of the technical team to test the particular system that was tested in 2005. That's right, isn't it? And then he says this, he says, I collated the materials together and would have presented them to my line manager. This was the one in 2005 was our first step of potentially many tests. So it was agreed that this was a good starting point. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree with that? What he said there in that answer?
It was certainly a collective decision to test to that standard, and a collective decision and discussions with the BRE to test that particular assembly.
Yes. Do you also agree with him that it was your first step of potentially many tests? So it was agreed it was a good starting point. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, yes.
Yeah. And if we can look at what he says at day 75, page 71. And I want to look at lines 3 to 8. I ask him the question, who in Kingspan had been involved in those discussions about what outer layer to choose? Do you see that there? And then he answers at line 5, it would have been myself and Philip Heath. We were solely, perhaps naively, looking for a non-combustible board just to go on the outside. This was our first real step into this testing. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And do you agree with that?
I believe there was more people involved with regards to the collective decision to test that non-combustible board.
Yeah.
So I think it was the collective was greater than myself and Ivor, I believe.
But would you agree that even if there were more people involved in it, you were, what he says there about you were solely, perhaps naively, looking for a non-combustible board just to go on the outside?
I wouldn't use the word naively because it was in discussions with the BRE, so I wouldn't say naively we were looking for a non-combustible board.
I see, yeah. And I just want to show you one more passage from his evidence on this point. If we go to day 76, page 64. And I want to pick it up at lines 2 to 6. Perhaps we ought to pick up the question actually just before this. If we go to the page before. And I'm asking about expanding the scope of the May 2005 test. At line 21, and then at 25 at the bottom of that page I say, even though you knew that wasn't a truly representative test and you knew the K15 had been, and then he says this, yeah, I knew it wasn't a truly representative test, but it was to be taken, looked at, it wasn't supposed to be a representative test. It was supposed to be evidence of performance of an insulation behind a non-combustible layer. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, do you agree with what he says there, that it wasn't a truly representative test? Do you agree with that?
We felt it was representative of a non-combustible cladding panel on the outside.
I think maybe what Mr. Meredith was saying was that the system as tested wasn't truly representative of a system that would actually be installed commercially, because the form of the outside board was not one that would be used in that situation. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, yes. I think our feeling at the time and from the BRE that the board we use was representative of non-combustible cladding boards, panels within the marketplace. So I agreed that the panel we used was not typical of what was used in that end-use application, but was representative of non-combustible panels that could be.
Yeah, thank you.
I see. Well, I think we'll come back to the cladding board in a moment. So just moving on with that 2005 test. If we then look at Mr. Meredith's witness statement now, it's KIN 3022312 at page 5. So if we can go to page 5, and under A, if we could blow that first top of the page up, I just want to read you what Mr. Meredith put in his witness statement and ask you whether you agree with what he's put here. So he says this at A, Kingspan tried on numerous occasions to obtain a bigger scope of application for K15 to BS 8414 parts 1 and 2. After performing indicative testing of K15 to 8414 part 1 exposed to the full fire load without cladding, we arranged to test behind a non-combustible building board. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree with that? That you've gone from the test without cladding, the naked test, to the test behind a non-combustible building board?
Yes, that was a second test.
Yeah,
yes.
The one in May 05.
Yes.
Yeah. And he says this, we did this as the BRE advised that if we tested behind a non-combustible building board, they would give us scope to say that the system tested to could meet the BR 135 requirements when used behind all non-combustible cladding types. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, pausing there, is that consistent with your recollection that the BRE did advise that if you tested in that configuration, they would give you some form of documentation which said that the system tested could meet BR 135 when used behind all non-combustible cladding types?
That was my understanding of the discussions that were had, yes.
Yeah. And can you help us, who was it at the BRE you remember saying that at the time?
I don't, I'm afraid, because those meetings would have been with Ivor and his contacts at the BRE.
I see.
I don't believe I was present at those initial meetings.
Okay, yeah. And then he goes on, unfortunately, after testing successfully, i.e. meeting the BR 135 requirements, the BRE moved the goalposts and retracted this statement, leaving us a little in the lurch. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
I've already asked you about that, but you can see how Ivor puts it, Mr. Meredith puts it in this
Yes.
statement. Would you agree with that?
The narrative I'd use will be different, but yes, I agree with that, yes.
Yeah. And then he says this in the next paragraph. Shortly after this, myself, Philip Heath, technical manager, and the director of Kingspan offsite went to the BRE. Sarah Colwell and Tony Baker and the director of the BRE were in attendance, I believe, to attempt to obtain this when Kingspan launched the offsite division that included about 5 different build-ups. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall that meeting? You went together with Ivor Meredith and the director of Kingspan offsite to the BRE to attempt to obtain that wider scope of application. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that meeting particularly. I think I met Sarah Colwell once, but I can't recall that particular meeting.
Okay. And Mr. Meredith says this: the meeting became very heated as the BRE could not commit to a route to getting a full and comprehensive certification for the systems to BS 8414 parts 1 and 2. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Does that help with your recollection? He says it became very heated as the BRE were not committing to that route to full comprehensive certification. Do you remember that?
I don't recall that. What do we know what date this meeting was?
We'll check what Mr. Meredith said. I don't think we have an exact date. It was sometime after the test in May 2005.
Right.
Possibly July 2005, but we wondered if you could help.
No, like I say, I remember meeting Sarah Colwell once with Ivor. I don't recall 3 people from Kingspan attending. No, I've no recollection of that at all, I'm afraid.
Do you remember a meeting with Sarah Colwell where it became heated?
No, I don't.
It sounds like a memorable meeting.
Reading that, it does, but I have no recollection of
Okay.
such a meeting. I mean,
But do you have
Yeah.
any reason to believe that wasn't the case? Mr. Meredith appears to have a clear recollection of that.
He seems to have a clear recollection. Whether I was actually in attendance, I really cannot recall. And if
And then if we go to the next paragraph below that, he says, the meeting finished with the BRE stating that even after 15 tests at £8,000 test costs alone, they could not commit to being able to give Kingspan scope of application as they simply did not have the knowledge of these systems. Do you see that there?
yes, I do.
Again, does that provoke any form of recollection that they were saying, even if you did lots of tests, spending a lot of money, we can't commit to giving Kingspan scope of application as we just don't, you wouldn't even then have enough knowledge of the systems. Can you remember that conversation?
I can't recall that conversation. I just recall, as I mentioned earlier, that the BRE retracted on their initial comments to us.
Yeah. So you do recall being aware of the substance of this, even though you can't recall the conversation. Is that what you're saying?
I remember the 2 points I said, that the BRE suggested the assembly, and I recall the BRE retracting that suggestion or recommendation or idea.
Yeah. And he goes on, picking it up in the third line there, he said, this was very apparent as at a lot of tests we conducted, numerous BRE personnel would wish to witness the testing. All they could commit to was that after we conducted £250,000 worth of test work, they would hopefully be able to identify some extended application rules that would allow them to write something more comprehensive about the performance of the systems. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Now, I've been reminded that according to Mr. Meredith, he thinks this meeting was sometime after 2006 and before Kingspan Offsite performed their own 8414 testing. So it will be in around 2006 that this is likely to have happened, we believe.
Right, okay.
Does that help at all?
Not particularly, no.
Can you help us? You've said that you do recall the BRE retracting that statement about extended applications. Why is that not mentioned anywhere in your witness statement?
I don't know. It didn't come to mind during the time. It's only through reading further documents that comes to mind, and it reminded me of the situation.
Isn't that quite an important point that ought to have come to mind when you're discussing? And your statement is very long. It's 87 pages, and you go into a lot of detail about these tests and what was going on at the time within Kingspan. Wasn't it quite important to tell us that the BRE had retracted a statement to that effect?
It was, but you have to remember it was 14, 15 years ago. You know, it was, yeah, I just couldn't recall at the time when I gave my statement.
Is the reason you don't mention it in your statement because actually that shows that you, at the time, knew that you couldn't use that 8414 test and extrapolate out to other systems? You were fully aware that that was the BRE's position?
No, not at all.
So no, that's not the reason why you didn't include it in your statement?
That's correct.
And your evidence is that you just simply, it didn't come to mind, is that right? When you were preparing your statement?
During the course of giving my statement, yes, I hadn't recollected that.
Do you accept that even if at some earlier stage you believe that the May 2005 8414 test data could be used in a representative way, once you were aware that the BRE weren't supporting that position, you knew that that couldn't happen? It couldn't be used in a representative way?
Sorry, it was a lot. Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yes. So even if you believed at some earlier stage that the test data could be used in a representative way to support the application of K15 in other systems that were different from the one tested, once you're aware that the BRE were not prepared to do that, you knew, didn't you, that that representative position wasn't tenable? That's what I want to put to you.
At that particular time, yes.
Yes. And I want to put to you that the BRE, Tony Baker and Sarah Colwell, made that clear to you personally in a meeting.
I don't recall that particular meeting. I don't know. I've no record of my attendance at that meeting. I don't know if the BRE have, but I cannot recollect that meeting with other people from Kingspan.
But do you accept that if you'd simply read the criteria in BR 135, you would have understood that the test could not be used in a representative way? It was system specific.
I agree at that time, yes, but we were working under, obviously, the recommendations of the BRE. Like I say, this was, we were the first or the second on that particular rig at the time, and I think, there's a huge learning curve for both ourselves and the BRE, and yeah, I think, in many ways they were probably holding our hand a little bit as well.
Yes. I appreciate that, Mr. Heath, and I appreciate that's your evidence as to what you were told by the BRE. But once you knew they'd retracted that statement, what I'm putting to you is then you knew it couldn't be used in a representative way.
Once we knew that if they'd retracted it, that's correct, yes.
Yeah. Now, if we go on to look at your witness statement at page 74, paragraph 11.20, you say this, you say, I note that an email from Ivor to the BRE on the 30th of May 2005 records me as being in attendance at the 2005 8414 test, and this is also recorded in my Outlook calendar. But due to the time that has passed, I do not now have any recollection of attending this test, and I'm unable to comment on how many BRE employees attended the test. And then you say, to the best of my recollection, I did not attend any other BS 8414 testing during my time as technical manager. Do you see that there?
I do see that, yes.
Now, thinking about it now, can you help us? Can you recall whether or not you did attend that test, or does that remain your evidence that you simply can't remember?
It was certainly in my Outlook calendar when I was providing my evidence. I think it was either on a Monday or Tuesday, I can't recall, but I've no recollection of attending that particular test at the BRE. I believe I have seen an 8414 test year before this, or a similar test I think it was at the BRE Cardington, where they were testing an external wall insulation system. But I have no recollection of attending this particular test on the 30th of May.
If you'd attended it, it would have been a memorable event, wouldn't it? You'd have had to have travelled to the BRE facility in Watford.
Absolutely, yes. It would have been a significant journey.
So does it follow from that it's likely that you didn't attend the test, do you think?
I don't believe I was in attendance, no.
I see. Now, in terms of the particular materials used in the test, and just starting with the K15 insulation, if we go back to paragraph 311 on page 11 of your statement, you say there, just over halfway down, about 5 lines up from the bottom, you say this, it begins for the purpose of, you say, for the purpose of preparing this witness statement, I have been unable to confirm what K15 product was used in the 2005 8414 test. However, given the date of the test and the chronology of the product development described in paragraphs 317 to 318 below, I understand that it cannot have been the Pembridge-produced new technology K15. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
So you helpfully tell us that it can't have been the new technology K15. That was not developed until September 2006, is what you tell us elsewhere. But going back to that previous sentence where you say you've been unable to confirm what K15 product was used in this test, can you just help us what you mean by that? Did you know at the time what K15 product was being tested?
At the time, I would have known which particular K15 or technology was being adopted on that particular test, yes.
And you talked there about, you said you would have known which particular K15. How many versions of K15 was there in 2005?
There was only one.
So there was one, and that was the version being sold, I assume. Is that right?
That would have been the version that was being sold for anything less than 18 metres at that time, yes.
And are you able to confirm that the K15 product used in the test was the same one actually being sold to market at the time? Was that your understanding?
That would have been my understanding, yes.
Now, we've already touched on the outermost layer of the system tested in 2005. And I want to show you just a couple more passages in Mr. Meredith's evidence. If we go to day 75, page 67, picking it up there at line 15, just over halfway down, I ask him, as far as you were aware, were those cement particle boards non-combustible? Do you see that there? And this is where I've taken him to the test report, and that's where I've got the cement particle boards from. And he answers this way. He says, it was a non-combustible cement particle board manufactured by UAC Berger. They were a Middle Eastern manufacturer. But yes, it was non-combustible as far as I was aware. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And was that consistent with your understanding at the time as to what those boards were?
I was aware it was a non-combustible board, yes.
Yeah, but did you leave it to either to source the particular type of board that was used in the test?
We did leave it to either to procure all the components or to work with other component suppliers to provide free of cost
Yes.
materials for the test.
Yeah. And then at the very end of his evidence, day 76, if we look, day 76, page 207, he's being asked a final question about, is there anything more you want to say? And then he says at line 18, he says, firstly, the non-combustible board was a UAC Berger board, which was known as, I think it was marketed as Superlux in the UK, and it was a cellulose fibre cement board. So as opposed to, although it had particles in it, it had a cellulose fibres in it as well. So yes, not traditionally suitable for the outside of a cladding, but it was a non-combustible board. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And do you agree with what he says there, that it was not traditionally suitable for the outside of a cladding, but it was a non-combustible board?
Yes, I do.
And given that Ivor ordered the materials and built the rig himself, there's no reason to doubt what he says on that, is there?
No, he procured the products, and if he requested a non-combustible building board, I can only assume that was what was supplied. I don't believe he built the rig himself, by the way.
No, he had help from Eurofox, didn't he?
Right.
Well, sorry, that was his evidence to us. That
Right,
he
okay.
helped,
But no, he wouldn't. I was just saying he wouldn't have been capable of building the rig himself. It's more than a one-man job.
Yeah. If we go to your witness statement and we look on page 79 of your statement, there's a footnote right at the bottom, footnote 48. I just want to read that to you. You say, as part of my preparing this witness statement, it has been brought to my attention that the 2005 BS 8414 test report records the cladding panel used to have been a cement particle board. I now understand from colleagues that the material used was likely, in fact, a non-combustible fibre cement board. I'm not able to shed any light on this issue, and it's not something I was aware of until very recently. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, when did you become aware of this? That it was a non-combustible fibre cement board as opposed to a cement particle board?
Obviously, when I was preparing my witness statement.
And you say you became aware of it, you say from other colleagues. You say, I now understand from colleagues. Which other colleagues?
I think it was Adrian Brazier might have highlighted that, because I think they were doing some audit as to what had been provided for that particular test, because I don't think Ivor's records either were available or up to date, or I don't think we could source it from the BRE. And
Adrian Brazier just told you this out of the blue, or how did that come to happen, that you were told that?
I think we were discussing the various tests that had been undertaken at the time, and I was trying to refresh my memory looking through the test report, and it was mentioned then that it was actually a different, it was a non-combustible board that had been used, not necessarily what I think had been written in the report. It was been brought to my attention.
Right, yeah, I see. Are you aware that the 2005 test report has now been withdrawn by Kingspan?
I was made aware.
When were you made aware of that?
Earlier this month, 2 weeks ago maybe.
Right, yeah. Can we just go to a letter from Kingspan to the BRE dated the 23rd of October 2020? This is at KIN 3024104. We can see there it's dated the 23rd of October 2020. It's to Debbie Smith, and it's from Adrian Pargeter. We can see that at the end of the letter if we look down at the end of it. There, Adrian Pargeter for Kingspan. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Have you seen this letter before?
Could I just see the top of it again? Oh,
Yes,
you.
sorry. Yeah, we'll just show you the top page. It's on Kingspan letter paper. You think you've seen that before, coming here today?
I don't believe I have.
No. If we look in the second paragraph down on that in that letter, he says, as you may be aware, Kingspan is currently involved as a core participant in the Grenfell Tower Public Inquiry. As part of our cooperation with requests for information from the inquiry, we've undertaken a comprehensive review of all past and current test data, which relates to K15, including BS 8414 tests. Do you see that there? And then it says underneath that, through our review, we have now concluded that tests carried out in 2005 and 2014 featured a product that was not sufficiently representative of the product currently sold into the marketplace. We have listed these reports in a small summary of their construction build-ups below. Do you see that there? And then what we can see is the first construction build-up listed in that table, which is test 220876, is the one carried out in May 2005. And you can see on the tested construction, it says masonry substrate, 60mm K15 mechanically fixed, and then UAC cement particle boards, cavity barriers, etc. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Did that come as a surprise to you when you were made aware of this letter, that test report was being withdrawn because the featured product, the K15 that was tested, was not sufficiently representative of the product sold into the marketplace?
I didn't realise we were still using that report in.
So you didn't realise that
No,
they were still...
I didn't realise that report was still being referenced, because we've obviously done a number of tests since then, and I think we've even replicated that test. So I didn't realise it was still being used.
But the question I asked you was, did it come as a surprise to you when you were made aware of this letter, that the K15 tested was not representative of what had then been sold to market?
I was surprised it was still being used, bearing in mind they had replicated it with what we call new technology product. So.
No, that's not an answer to my question. Did it come as a surprise to you that it was being withdrawn because the K15 tested was not what had been sold to market?
It wasn't a surprise, because I didn't realise they were still using that test report in the marketplace.
Why did you think they weren't still using that test report in the marketplace?
I think, and well, from memory, I think test reports, there is reference to five years. I don't know if those can be extended, but I think there is some reference in fire test reports about the longevity, whether it's reviewed in 5 years or lapses in 5 years, I can't recall. So, yeah, and not being involved in the UK market, to say a surprise, I can't offer an opinion one way or another whether I was surprised or not, really.
Is the reason that you were not surprised because you knew from 2006 onwards that Kingspan had started selling K15, which was fundamentally different to that which was used in the 2005 test?
I don't believe the product was fundamentally different. I presume you're referencing what we called old technology versus new technology.
Yes, and when I mean fundamentally different, I mean on fire performance, I should have clarified. Is the reason you're not surprised because you knew from 2006 that Kingspan was selling K15, which performed very differently in fire?
No, I don't believe that's the case, no.
Okay. And you don't believe you were aware of that in 2007 and 2008?
In relation to what?
That you were selling a K15 product that performed very differently in fire to the old technology K15. Are you saying you didn't know that?
I know that there was subsequent tests we did where the product, and it was the product tested in the 8414, if those are you're referring to in 2008-7, it was a completely different assembly to that we tested in 2005.
Are you saying you didn't know at that time that the K15 itself, not the assembly, the K15 itself was performing very differently in fire in those tests, the new technology K15 as compared to the old technology K15?
In those particular tests, it performed differently than the large-scale test in 2005. Now, the question, it was a completely different assemblies that were tested in 2007 and 8, which may have had an impact on the performance of the board.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to this point because I'm going to take you to some documents that you saw in 2007,
Okay.
and I'll ask you about this again. If we could go to KIN 405075. This is an email from Mr. Meredith to various technical services generic addresses within Kingspan, copying in Malcolm Rochford. Do you see that there? It's dated the 26th of May 2005, so it's just a few days before the test was carried out.
This
And
is the non-combustible cladding. Is this the one?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
This is the May 2005 test. I'm coming back to that now.
Right, okay, sorry.
So this is the 26th of May 2005, and Mr. Meredith is saying in the first line, please find enclosed pictures of the 8414 Part 1 test rig I have been constructing at the BRE Watford this and last week. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And is it likely that you would have been the recipient of this email because you would have been on one of those generic technical email
I would have been.
lists?
I would have received this. I was on one of those.
Yeah.
One of those email addresses, I believe. Yes.
Yeah. And in this email, he says in the next paragraph, the construction utilises an aluminium bracket system, 60mm Cooltherm K15, etc., with ventilated cavity barriers at floor level. And then in the second sentence, he says the outer face is clad with a sacrificial cement board, which will be destroyed by the 3 megawatt fire that will be breaking out of the aperture at the bottom of the facade. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
And would you agree that the use of sacrificial there is consistent with Mr. Meredith saying this wasn't supposed to be a truly representative test of a real-life cladding system? It was supposed to be a simplified test, if we can put it like that, with just a building board or a non-combustible particle board.
I'm not sure if it was a simplified test because it was still a large-scale test. So it wasn't simplified from the requirements of the 8414. The sacrificial cement board, that was a representative cement board, and I think you're finding, from what I've seen of this test, that most of the cladding is destroyed at certain parts of the test. So
I say simplified because isn't it right, and wouldn't you have understood this at the time, that you would never put those boards, whether they're fibre cement boards or cement particle boards, on a tall building, would you? You would never clad it in that, would you?
No, you'd use similar products to that which have a finish on them when the performance might be the same, but that particular product, no, it was representative of a finished non-combustible panel.
Well, you're right, it didn't have a finish on it, so a panel in the real world would either have a finish or would be made of a different substance, perhaps a metal panel or something like that. But isn't that entirely the point? These systems are very complicated and they're very complex to test in large-scale fire systems, aren't they? You know that now.
I knew it then. It's a very complicated and technical test. I think that the interest from the BRE bears testimony to that, and that, to use his phrase, sacrificial cement board was, as I said, following the recommendations that we received from the BRE at the time.
Yes, but this was one stepping stone, wasn't it? And what you'd planned to do, isn't this right, was try and pass this test and then introduce, in partnership with someone like Metsec or Celotex, an actual real-life cladding panel. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct. It was, as I said previously, it was, it was a stepping stone to other assemblies as well.
Yeah.
Whether it be Metsec, Celotex, Kingspan offsite, there was a number of other component suppliers.
Yes. And would you agree with me that the reason you wouldn't put that building board on the outside of a building is that it wouldn't act as any kind of rain screen? It would soak up the water, the moisture. It would become soggy. Do you agree with that?
I don't know about the physical properties of those cement particle boards and how they're affected by moisture, and so I can't comment on that particular product.
In your time as technical manager at Kingspan, did you ever come across a proposal by anybody, and we'll see, you advised on lots of buildings, did you ever come across a proposal to put those kind of boards on the outside of a building?
Not in the UK, but certainly similar boards from a cladding point of view, as I said, finished boards of a similar composite, but not that particular board, no.
No, when you say not in the UK, where are you talking about?
We see that type of board in the US in rain screen solutions.
And when have you become aware of that?
Probably in the last 5 years or so, I believe.
So you weren't aware of that at the time?
No.
No. Now, at the end of that email, I want to ask you now about the cavity barriers that were used in that test. Can you see what he does is he says in the very last sentence, a sample of the intumescent ventilated fire break is situated on my desk should you wish to have a closer look. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
Now, is it right? Did you share an office with Mr. Meredith at this time? He said in his evidence that there was a period of time, although he couldn't give us precise dates, when you shared an office. Is that right?
There was a particular time where Ivor and I shared an office, but it was sometime before May 2005.
I see. Well, he says he's put a sample of that intumescent fire break on his desk. Did you go and see it? Did you go and have a look at it?
I can't recall. I'd seen images of it previously, but I can't recall going into his office to have a closer look at it.
Were you aware at the time that it was a very unusual product, that cavity barrier?
I wasn't aware of it. I was aware that it was used for rain screen applications. I wasn't aware of it was unusual from that respect, no. I knew it was designed for rain screen applications.
I see. What I want to put to you is that this was not a commonly used product, and it had a very high graphite content, which is one of the reasons why it wasn't commonly used. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't know. I've no expertise in cavity barriers, so I can't really comment on that. But when you say popular, I don't believe rain screen was a popular solution in 2005 particularly.
If we just look at a photograph here of this, it's KIN 405079. These are some photographs which Mr. Meredith took as he was putting the rig together that was sent back to Kingspan. Do you remember seeing these kind of photographs at the time?
I would have seen them at the time.
Yeah. And it's right, isn't it, that that's the building board that we see below the fibre cement board or cement particle board. Do you see that? Screwed
Yes, I do.
there. And then above that we can see the silver foil is the K15, yes?
Yes.
And then above that, the black line with holes in it, did you understand that to be the cavity barrier?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Can you remember forming a view at the time as to whether that was a representative cavity barrier in a system like this?
I can't remember, I'm afraid.
Now, the BR135 classification report for this test, the 8414 Part 1, was in fact not issued until long after you'd stopped being involved with K15. It was issued on the 28th of September 2015, so over 10 years later. So I'm not going to be asking you about that because it's after you'd finished your involvement. But what I want to ask you is about BR135 classification in the period after that 2005 test when you were involved, yes?
Yes.
Now, at the time that the 2005 test was carried out, did you understand there to be a requirement for a second report, a classification report, to BR135?
I wasn't aware at that time that it was a requirement, no.
If we look at paragraph 6.6 on page 38 of your witness statement, you were asked the question, were you aware between 2005 and 2014 no BR135 classification report existed for a system incorporating K15? And you answer, You say, I would have been aware that we did not obtain a BR 135 classification report for the 2005 8414 test. I think we probably assumed that although it was an option to commission a classification report, it was not necessary, as the 2005 8414 test report contains sufficient information in itself to demonstrate that the tested system had satisfied the requirements of BR 135. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do.
So just to be absolutely clear on your evidence, I think before we looked at this, you told us that you weren't aware at the time of the 2005 test that there was a requirement for a second report, a classification report. Yes?
That's correct, yes.
But here you're saying in your witness statement, I would have been aware that we did not obtain that report. I think we probably assumed that although it was an option to commission, it was not necessary.
Yes.
So can you help us as to what is your evidence on this? Were you aware that there was a requirement for that report? Or were you aware, but at the time you assumed that although it was an option, it wasn't necessary?
I was aware there was a classification report, and I was aware we didn't obtain one, and I was under the impression that the report on the BS 8414 test was sufficient to determine the results under the BR 135. It's quite unusual at this time, because I think I stand to be corrected, but it would be unusual to undertake a test to a British standard and then have to have a classification report on top of a test report. So it would have been very unusual at the time. So although we were probably aware of the BR 135, I think it was felt and probably either advised that looking at the test report that we received for that particular test, the BRE extrapolated the data, and I think either was capable of extrapolating the data to determine that we had passed the requirements of that BR 135 and therefore didn't require to have a published copy.
I see. You say it was quite unusual at this time to have that British standard and then have to get a separate report, but we did look earlier at approved document B,
Yes.
which makes very clear, doesn't it, in 12.5 that it has to be classified to BR 135.
Yes. No, I wasn't bespoke to that 841. I mean, British standard tests in general, I don't know of another British standard test that you would undertake, get a test report that you could determine you passed from, and then get a subsequent report analysing the results of the test you've already had done.
So I think now you're telling us that you was aware that there was something called a classification report, yes?
I was aware of the BR 135 classification report,
Yeah.
but I was also under the impression, rightly or wrongly, that you could extrapolate the results from the test report, which is, I believe, what Ivor did and what the BRE did as well, advising Ivor that we had been successful when you analyse it, if you'd analyse it to BR 135. But we didn't formally request that classification report for whatever reason.
Yeah. When you said you didn't think it was necessary to get one, were you aware in 2005 that 8414 Part 1 itself doesn't contain any pass-fail criteria? You have to go to BR 135 to get the pass-fail criteria and work out whether it's passed.
I believe that's correct, but I also believe you can, from the test report, you can extrapolate the data you require for BR 135. So although the test report doesn't say pass or fail, you can extrapolate the data from that test report to determine if it is indeed met the requirements of that classification report.
But as we looked at earlier, it's not simply an extrapolation of test data, is it? It's not simply reading the temperatures and looking at whether you've passed. There's the mechanical performance risk assessment that has to be carried out, that holistic risk assessment on how the system's performed. You agreed with that earlier. You said you understood that, yes?
Absolutely, I do agree with that.
Yes. So if that's right, and it's more than just reading off temperatures and ticking yes, no, whether we've hit the 600 degrees or not, if you knew that, how could you think that you could say that BR135 was satisfied without that specialist classification report?
Well, I believe that the data that's in the test report for a person who's got the experience of reading those reports can determine whether it meets those requirements. And I think Ivor was informed by the BRE either after the test or a few days after the test that it would have met those requirements.
And when you're referring there to for a person who's got the experience of reading those reports, who are you referring to there? A fire engineer, yes?
Well, people at the BRE.
Yes.
I believe Ivor at the time would have had sufficient, although he wasn't a fire engineer, he had enough experience to determine that it also met those requirements.
Why do you say that? He wasn't a qualified fire engineer.
He wasn't. I think just, his experience of working closely with the BRE, I think he picked up a reasonable degree of knowledge to analyse that the data that's in the test report.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm halfway through this topic, but I think...
Well, I think we're not
If
going
I-
to finish it this evening, I'm afraid, are we?
No, we're not. I think we should stop there.
So do I. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Yes. Well, there it is, Mr. Heath. We've probably got as far as we can get today.
Okay.
And that means I'm afraid I have to ask you to come back again on Monday of next week to continue your evidence. But I think you were expecting that anyway, weren't you?
I was, yes.
Good. Well, I'm glad you made appropriate arrangements then. So we'll break there. We'll resume at 10 o'clock on Monday morning.
Okay.
And I have to ask you, please, not to discuss your evidence or anything that relates to it while you're away from the hearing room.
Right.
All right?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Well, if
Thank
you'd like
you.
to go now, the usher will look after you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll take this with me.
No, I should leave that there. That'll be fine.
Okay,
Thanks very much.
thank you.
Good. 10 o'clock on Monday then.
Thank
please.
you.
Thank you very much.